Legal cases, legal issues, legal matters. You're watching WFTV's Law Talk with anchor Christopher Heath and expert legal analyst, attorney Mark NeJame.
All right, let's talk about some of the current cases, issues, and legal matters that our viewers are talking about. Joining me today is legal analyst Mark NeJame of the NeJame Law Firm, and Albert Yamfa, a partner at NeJame Law who specializes in personal injury. One of the words, at least in the news business, that we often will hear is police brutality, and it seems to kind of be a catch-all. It has a very specific definition, at least when it comes to the law.
It does, Chris, and we see so many more cases coming in than ever before in my rather long career. I've never seen so many calls come in, and I will say that many of them are without merit. They simply are. Law enforcement are there to protect us, to protect and serve, and the vast majority of law enforcement officers do that. However, as we all know, there is a handful, as there is in any profession, which seemingly cross the lines. And we see it, we've seen it more and more, and the reason is that we see it more and more is because of social media, because of body cams that are now required in many areas, if not most, where law enforcement officers have to have that body cam on them so we can really see what's going on. So we hear a lot of people really cry wolf, and that it's really a normal use of force to effectuate an arrest, which is necessary in some cases. But we also see a real abuse of that with certain, particularly with certain law enforcement officers. There's usually a handful that have these repeated actions. And when you go look at their personnel files, when you go look at what they might have been reprimanded or some of the allegations, you see that it's a disproportionate number that there's accusations with. Not necessarily, sometimes it can be a one-off, but a lot of times that's what happens. So we're very, very select when we looked at those, because this does affect a law enforcement officer's career, and we don't want to be taking undue shots at them. However, when in fact they're using that excessive force and abusing their power, yes, they are subject to lawsuit, and those suits are brought.
And Albert, what exactly do people need to know about this? Because as I mentioned, this kind of is a big nebulous concept, but at the same time, this affects not only, as Mark mentioned, law enforcement, but the public as well.
Yeah, anytime there's going to be an arrest attempt, there's going to be physical contact between a suspect and a law enforcement officer. So the definition is legally it's that an officer is able to use reasonable force necessary to effectuate an arrest. So we're talking about reasonable force. So the definition of police brutality is using force that is not reasonable to effectuate an arrest. So what can be considered excessive force can even be non-violent. So let's just say I've been arrested. I am complying with the officer. I'm in handcuffs. Even minor physical contact can be excessive for that particular instance because that force is no longer necessary to be used. So every single case is certainly different. You have to look at how a suspect might have reacted to the officer, whether they complied, whether there was any resistance. But that's the legal definition. Reasonable force that is not reasonable to effectuate an arrest.
And you mentioned social media, and I know as body cameras have become more pervasive, dash cams are out there as well. Everyone now has a camera on their cell phone. We're flooded with videos, and so often those videos don't capture everything. They don't capture. The body cams do a better job, dash cams, I think, but it's the cell phone video that the average person's, they may not have gotten their phone out right away. They may have only gotten the last 15, 16 seconds, and they don't show the whole story. That's important because the court is going to look at the whole story.
Well, the court will look at it, the lawyers who are evaluating the case will look at it, and a jury will look at that. And also, even as to the dash cam, you might have one dash cam on one responding law enforcement officer showing one angle, but then you're going to see others that, whereas that one might be obstructed, or it might have come on late, or whatever. But you're exactly right, because what we have to do is look at the whole picture when we're evaluating these cases. Is it a snapshot that you get with a small clip, or are you getting the whole movie? Are you getting a picture, or are you getting the whole story? And we want to look at the whole story because, as Albert said, any abuse is simply inappropriate. An extra kick after somebody's down. If somebody is saying, hey, my handcuffs are too tight, and all of a sudden they're finding themselves subject to being hit because somebody's saying that they resisted. Those are things that have to be looked at. And I think that it's really because of social media, the public is aware that there are certain law enforcement officers out there who abuse their position. And the challenge is for those many, many good officers and deputies that they get hurt by that Why? Because some people believe that all law enforcement is bad as a result of those few. And so on the other side, they have to look to make sure they're preserving the integrity of those good officers, and we have to make sure that we go after those bad ones, those ones that are abusing their authority and their power and hurting the public and hurting their fellow law enforcement officers by abusing their authority.
And Albert, like isn't anything else we mentioned, if you have a question, reach out to an attorney, find out exactly, because you may have felt like it went too far, but by the same token, find out, and that's where an attorney can offer some of that guidance, right?
And as to that point, Chris, I want to say one thing, I'm sorry. There's a statutory cap. So even though there can be tremendous damages, unless you get through like a 1983 action to show some sort of color of law or some regular policy that was broken, there's a statutory cap. So sometimes we might have a case that may be worth $1 million, $2 million, whatever the number is, and if it's capped at $200,000, you need to know what those issues are, how you in fact pierce through that, or are you stuck with that statutory cap? So as to what you were saying about counsel, it's critical.
And if I may, counsel is critical because the cards are stacked against plaintiffs in these types of cases. The concept of sovereign immunity stems from the Old English where the king can do no wrong. So no matter what your damages are, you are capped at $200,000 unless you find a way to circumvent that. And again, it requires very specific legal expertise.
And that is one of those things, sovereign immunity is one of those things that if you deal with the government and you're dealing with the state government, city government, or federal government, you're going to run into some issues of sovereign immunity. That's another conversation for another time.
Thanks,
Albert,
Chris.
thank you. Mark, thank you as always. All right, if you'd like to watch more of these law talks, visit our website, wftv.com/legal, or join us each week right here on Facebook. I'm Christopher Heath, and thanks for watching.
WFTV's Law Talk was brought courtesy of the Personal Injury and Accident Division of NeJame Law.